Welcome to this conversation about ancestors, ritual, and family constellations. And today it will also be about systemic ritual because I'm talking to Daan van Kampenhout, the founder of Systemic Ritual Method, shamanic practitioner and teacher. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
So, if I may, I will just jump straight into it. And
Yeah.
my first question to you, which I'm asking of people lately, is what is or what are ancestors?
Well, the first question, of course, is what people would think about is the bloodline. So, what is an ancestor is somebody who lived before you, who had the chance and the luck and the years of living to produce offspring that in turn produced another offspring, etc. So, the ancestors, the most simple answer is those who came before us are bloodlines. So like a web almost reaching behind us. 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great grandparents, etc. But I think that's a narrow definition because, for example, if I think of my mother and the importance of her sisters in her life and how she interacts with her sisters and how they played a role in my life, directly or indirectly, you can't say that the ancestors are only those who are in the direct bloodline. It's really the ancestor field is much larger. It includes, um, uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters, nephews, nieces. The field is much more populated than just the direct bloodline. Then there is, maybe you could say, there's also not just the ancestors that somehow contributed to who we are physically, but we have the ancestors of our culture. We have the ancestors of the mythology. We have the ancestors of the religious or spiritual practices that we may have grown up in or were introduced to. So ancestors, I would say, is the ancestor field is all that knowledge, all that information, all that energy of those who lived before us, who shaped us, who made us who we are, not just physically, also emotionally, spiritually, socially, etc.
Thank you. And just to ask as well, in the way how you see ancestors, um, are they are they people of the past? Are they staying in the past, or are they also in the present? And is there such a thing as a well ancestors and unwell ancestors, and whether that matters for?
That's two very different questions. So what you're asking are two very different questions. So I'm going to what I see as one of these questions. Are the ancestors something in the past, or do they live in the past, exist in the past, or no longer exist because they are in the past, or are they here and now? I think the answer is both. Obviously, they lived before us. Obviously, we know maybe 1, 2, 3 generations, but then we don't know their names usually. We don't know how they lived. That's the past, obviously. Still, their energy, their imprints, the effects of their deeds, both individually and collectively, may have a strong effect on how we live. So they are definitely in the here and now, indirectly, you know. But when we do ritual, when we pray, when we dream, we can somehow transcend this division between past and now, and we can open that up, and we meet in a place that's in between the past and the here and now, the space of ritual. So they are in the past, obviously, but through ritual, through prayer, through trance, through dreams, we can, we no longer need that division between now and past, and we can meet with them. And then I said, your question was actually 2 questions. I don't remember what would have been the second.
I mentioned the presence of the well ancestors and the unwell ancestors, and how that could influence somebody's life.
Oh, yeah. I think this is, it's a very relevant question, but for a different reason than you may ask it. I sometimes get people and they say, like, oh, my ancestors did terrible things. It's not a safe place for me, the ancestor field. I understand that. I completely understand that. At the same time, it's a trap to think like that on some level. Because, for example, I may be in a really bad mood, right? And my partner, he gets it. And I'm annoyed, I'm complaining, I'm whining, me, and it's not a nice atmosphere in the house. So for him, I'm really not the best person to be around at that time. But maybe my mother calls me or a friend and they say, "Hey, how are you doing? I'm okay. Yeah, sure, I'm good. How are you?" And I'm like optimistic and friendly. And that's me just in the same like 5 minutes time frame. And I think it's the same about ancestors. Like who is successful or balanced in all areas of their life? Nobody. But most people luckily have some parts in their life where they are, feel good about themselves and can be creative and have a meaningful existence for themselves and others. And we all have parts of our lives where we feel incomplete and suffering and traumatized and whatever. So I don't like the division between the whole ancestors and the broken ancestors, although it makes sense from a certain point of view. But I like to see it more like, every ancestor has elements of wholeness and has elements of brokenness. And depending on the ritual, depending on our prayer, depending on our focus, we work with either their brokenness and try to provide something that might make them more whole, or we call their wholeness so that it might give something to us or other ancestors. So I don't like to see ancestors as either broken or whole. I'd like to see every ancestor as a complete human being, which means some of their being is functional and complete, and some of their being is dysfunctional and incomplete. Like we ourselves, like every living human being. They're no different than we.
Thank you. That makes me think of something that I think you mentioned in one of the rituals about the ancestors going into the north, and the further back they are behind us, the further in the north they are, and the more healed and the more transcendent maybe they become. They turn more into a resourceful guide and support. And I've read somewhere else that the more broken, more unwell ancestors are sort of the closer they are to us, the more there is of their human side still there, of their human stories and pain still there. And then the further back you go, the more they are in the resourceful place for us.
Yeah, I think when you mentioned the North, that would presume that people understand something about the wheel as I have gotten to know and develop it. So let's take out the word North and, for example, replace it with the light. Because many cultures, and especially many Western people in more New Age type of thinking, modern spirituality, they have ideas about light. So the ancestor or the person who dies somehow returns to a source of light. And we can imagine that somebody who died very recently and may not even be fully aware that they died because maybe it was an accident or they were drugged in a hospital or something, that they don't just slide easily into that light because they're either not aware that they have to go anywhere or they are longing to their physical existence and in a way reaching out to the physicality which they can't really do anymore. So they are closer to the border, to the physical world. And ideally, I think many cultures and religions and spiritual systems say that people after that death, the ideal way is that they slowly go into this source of light, returning into some kind of source. And in order to do that, they have to disidentify with the physical world and let go. So, in that sense, yes, there is a path that ancestors could travel after their physical death from, let's say, the physical world to being absorbed back into a source of creation. And if they're very close to this physical world still, they might still need help. They might still be traumatized or very identified with who they were in their physical existence. But when they start to travel a little bit and come closer to that light, there might be some kind of, if you speak about the ancestors as resources, that's a very ideal zone for us because they might still hear our voices. But when they respond, it's not out of trauma, but it's out of connection that they still might have to their descendants. So, yes, there is something in this model of like a zone or a place where the ancestors can be, where they are more and more free, more and more um, permeable for the source of creation, but still can hear and respond to their descendants.